So we've set up the new game state and how to handle it, the play state and how to handle it in the last video. So now we need to figure out how our game is going to change once the game is over. So we're going to set it up so our spawn volumes will stop spawning, our character won't be able to collect any more batteries, and we'll enter a cinematic mode so we can't move the camera or our character anymore. We're going to move between a couple different classes in this video, but I'll try to highlight which class we're in and which header or source file we're in at each point. So the simplest thing that we're going to set up first is going to be to disable the battery collection on our character. So to do that, we need to go to our tutorial code character source file, so tutorialcodecharacter.cpp. Go ahead and open that up and find our collect batteries function. So right here, void tutorial code character collect batteries. So we only want to collect batteries if the game is currently being played. So we need to first include the game mode actually. So just zoom out real quick, scroll back up to the top, and include tutorial code game mode.h. That's so we can access that get current state function that we set up previously. So scroll down to our collect batteries right here. So tutorial code collect batteries. And we only want to collect the batteries if the game mode current state is playing. So first let's get the game mode, and we're going to, let me zoom it out just a little bit so we can get that whole line in there. So a tutorial code game mode, we're going to get the current game mode with the gameplay statics function and then cast it to our specific game mode so we can access that play state enum that we set up previously. We're going to store that into a tutorial code game mode variable, my game mode. And since I've used this gameplay statics function, let me just scroll up to the top real quick and make sure I'm including gameplay statics. Oh, I'm not. So let's go ahead and include that now. Include Kismet gameplay statics. So like I said, it's got a lot of helper functions for getting the game mode, getting the pawn, so I use it fairly frequently when I'm working on projects like this. So we've gotten our game mode, and now if my game mode, and this is where we're going to call that get current state. So if I wanted to just find current state, it's private, so I actually can't find it here. But I can access that public get current state function. And if you remember, that's actually just going to return the tutorial code play state enum. So I can compare that directly to and see if we are currently playing. And if we are, then we can collect the batteries. And that autocomplete is just putting an extra bracket where I don't want it. So let's just delete that and then zoom out. So we are going to want to do this whole block all the way down to powering up if we're currently playing. So let's indent that one line, or one tab, I guess, and then put the closing brace there. So now if my game mode's current state is playing, so if we are currently playing, then this whole block with the collection and the powering up will be called. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything. So we'll go ahead and save that, and our character now will only collect batteries if we're actually currently playing the game. So let's go set up the functions in our spawn volume to enable and disable spawning. To do that, go to spawnvolume.h, so our header file, and these functions are going to be called by our handled new state function in the game mode, so we need to make sure to make them public. So go above the little private header there. So we'll just call this enable spawning and disable spawning. Now these are only being called internally in the code, so they don't actually have any ufunction modifiers, but if you wanted to, down the road, be able to call enable and disable spawning in blueprints, you could add a ufunction macro here with, blueprint callable or something like that as a keyword. So these functions are going to change a private variable for whether or not spawning is enabled. Or not spawning is enabled. And we'll call that be spawning enabled. So as you can see, this is another case of having these public functions that can modify a private variable so that other classes can't directly influence this variable, but they can call these functions that know how to handle the variable correctly. One of the cases that I think comes up a lot in templates with this is jumping. So can jump will trigger a jump boolean, but you can't access that boolean directly. So let's save this file and go to our spawn volume source file. We're going to quickly set up those spawning enabled and spawning disabled, or enable spawning and disable spawning functions. So we've got a spawn volume enable spawning. And that's just going to set be spawning enabled to true. And after that, we're going to have void a spawn volume disable spawning. And that's going to set be spawning enabled to false. So these functions will be able to be called by our game mode, and they'll toggle that boolean for whether or not we can spawn or not. And that will be in our tick function, a check on be spawning enabled. So if you remember the tick function, where did that go? Oh, a spawn volume tick is where we actually call spawn pickup. So we need to put a check in here for whether or not we can spawn. So if spawning is not enabled, do nothing. So if be spawning enabled, basically if it's false, then return. That'll just exit right out of the tick function. We won't go down here to the spawning. So it just is a check on whether or not we can spawn or not. So go ahead and save that. Sorry, I do it by instinct a lot of times, so I'll try to call it, save the file, and return to our game mode so we can actually start to call those spawn volume functions in the handler. So actually, before we do that though, it's going to be easier to talk to all the spawn volumes if we give our game mode an array to store every spawn volume in the level. So we'll go to our game mode header file, which I already have open here, and this is going to be private because the only class that should care about this array is our game mode. So let's create an array of spawn volumes, and we'll call that spawn volume actors. So basically at the start of the game, we're going to store all the spawn volumes in this array, turn them on, and then also set our play state to playing. And so to do that, we're going to override the begin play function. We've been overriding the tick function mostly until now, but begin play is also a function you might commonly override just to have a function that'll execute right at the start of gameplay. So we've set up the override here, and now we can go to the game mode source file and actually set up what happens when we begin play. So if we've got our tutorial code game mode begin play, we're going to call the super of begin play, which I think I've mentioned before. You always, when you're overriding a function, you tend to want to include any behavior also in the parent. So we just go ahead and call the super, and where you place that line depends on, or will directly affect when that behavior is called. So if you want everything previously defined to happen first, just put it here at the top of the function like I just did. So we will find all the actors. So to do that, we're going to find all spawn volume actors. And first we're going to set up a temporary array. And it's just to store any actor. And I'll explain why we have another array that's sort of the temporary holding one in just a minute. So we've got found actors, and we're going to use another gameplay statics function. And this one is going to be get all actors of class. And we're going to get the world. We were going to only look for things that are subclasses of spawn volume. So spawn volume static class. And store that in found actors. So the reason we had to set up a temporary array is because this get all actors of class only returns actors. And in order for us to access the functions we set up on our spawn volume, we have to cast from actor to spawn volume. And so while we're doing that, we can transfer them from the actor array to the spawn volume array. And it looks like I need to go up here to the top real quick and include our spawn volume because we're going to be working with it. So include spawn volume.h, and now our game mode knows what basically what I'm talking about when I say go look for all the spawn volumes. So now we're going to have a for loop that will go through every actor in that found actors array, this temporary array. So for every actor in found actors, we are going to, like I said, cast it to our spawn volume. And it's always really important when you're working with these generic functions like get all actors of class or get player pawn that you cast directly to your specific type of actor or pawn so that you can interact with your custom functions and variables. Because those functions aren't, the generic functions like get all actors of class aren't set up to always know to return your spawn volumes to you. They're just going to give you all the actors that they have in there. So, and then if we've successfully cast to a spawn volume actor here, then we can add this to our array that we set up to actually store them in the long term. So basically our spawn volume actors array that I set up in the header file, we're just going to use the add method and add the spawn volume actor there. So this will just loop through all the actors that are returned and store them in the array if they are actually spawn volume actors. So once we've done through that loop and filled the array with every spawn volume in the level, we can set current state on eTutorial code play state. So now that we've stored all the spawn volumes, we are ready for this to be, gameplay to really begin. And so we're going to set the tutorial code play state to playing. So like I said, this set current state function not only changes that enum, but it calls the handler. So let's go add the code to our handler to actually enable and disable spawning as we are in the playing state or the game over state. If you remember, we set up the, here we go, handle new state. So right now these cases are empty. No matter which state we're in, nothing's going to happen. But we can go ahead and set up the, now that we've got the playing state, we're going to say for a spawn, basically for all of our spawn volumes in our array, in our spawn volume actors array, then we're going to call that enable spawning function. Again, this is the public function that's going to change that private b should spawn variable. So now we're going to say that when we are playing, the spawn volumes can spawn. So if the next state will be, if the game is over, the spawn volumes should deactivate. And so we're going to have that same loop. So for all the spawn volumes in our spawn volume, this is why we're storing this, so we don't have to loop through them all every time. Or at least loop through the level to go find them every time, because that can be an expensive operation. Then we're going to disable spawning. And also right here, we can add the code for the cinematic mode here under the game over state. So after we've looped through them all, we're going to get our player controller. And here we're not having to do any casting because we just want a function that's actually included in the base engine player controller class. And we're going to use another uGamePlayStatics function. Get player controller. And I think we mentioned this in the blueprint videos. Right now, this is set up only for a single player game. If I were going to make this multiplayer, I'd have to do a couple more checks to actually make sure I was getting the correct player controller to set the cinematic mode on. But for now, we're just going to get the player controller and set cinematic mode. And basically, this is going to turn on cinematic mode, stop the movement, and also stop the turning. So, whoop, true, true, and true. So basically just setting all of the booleans of that function to true. So this is going to be a very disabling cinematic mode. No more inputs available. So at this point, our game can handle both our gameplay and our game over behavior. So let's compile and test it out. We'll save this and right-click here on the project and make sure we're still in Debug Game Editor in case I have to come back here and debug my code. Go to Debug, Start New Instance, and Build. Oh, look, I actually have a typo. So let's go figure out what that was. No, I don't want to continue and run. I want to go figure out what I didn't do. So this is saying I have an undeclared identifier of a spawn volume, which probably means I didn't put a header here in the game mode like I needed to. So yes, include spawn volume.h. And this is in our game mode header. And so we actually can take that line now out of our game mode source because it's in the header, and so it'll keep being included here. So let's try that again. Debug, start new instance. And see, this is just teaching debugging, right? That's what I'm going for here. Oh. And there's another little Unreal trick. So one last thing. In the header file where I added that, we actually need this generated file to be the last include. So always make sure that in your header file, if you're including anything else, you need to also make sure that this generated header is the very last thing. So, okay, I'm gonna pause here and fix the coder, and then I'll come back and let you know basically what needs to get fixed here. Okay, so basically while I was off debugging, this whole game over statement, because it has multiple lines, it needs to be inside some more braces. But once that's ready to go, we just actually need to debug, start new instance, and build one more time. And here we go. So at this point, we've set up the decay rate on the player. We've got a game over. So if I play here, we've got the batteries spawning from the sky, but see how much slower my character is getting? Oh, he's got one battery to pick up here. Oh, he's gonna probably be too slow to reach that other battery before the game is over. Oh, and yeah. At this point, we've got the game over, right? I can't move the camera anymore. He's completely powered down. And so that's good. Our ticking is successfully decreasing the character's power. The batteries are no longer being spawned, if you've noticed that we're not seeing any more falling from the sky. But what would really make this easier to tell when the game is over is if we set up a HUD. So thanks for watching this video, and in the next video I'm going to set up a HUD to show our power level and also a little bit clearer indicator when the game is actually over. Thanks!